Welcome to Reconnecting with Wholeness, the podcast where we dive deep into the messy, beautiful journey of coming home to yourself. I'm your host, Paige, and together we'll gently question everything, bringing you deeper into self-awareness, acceptance, and trust. So take a breath, settle in, and let's begin. Hello, welcome back. I keep thinking we're over talking about the nervous system, and then it just keeps coming back up. Anyway, we are kind of moving forward with the rest of the body, but this topic for today does also talk about the nervous system a little bit. Surprise, surprise. And so today I'm going to talk about our hormones. And I didn't think when I originally was thinking about this season and talking about the body that I was going to discuss our hormones at all. But the more that I kept thinking about all of our conversations around the nervous system and kind of like where to go into the body first, the more I felt like the hormones was the right place to go, because it is this system that kind of runs in the background. That's the way that I'm going to phrase it. And even though those of us who, are born female and have cycles have, maybe a marker, and maybe we like a physical marker, and we're maybe a little more aware of our cycle, I don't know that everybody is. And I really felt like it was best to kind of talk about one of the things that affects so many parts of our body without us really thinking about it. And interestingly, it's pretty intertwined with the nervous system. So I am going to talk about both I'm going to call it the average, or like the ideal. Let's call it the ideal, not the average, but like the ideal male and female hormonal system. And with the understanding that there are many variations here. Especially for those with like a female hormonal cycle, there are all sorts of irregularities and conditions and all of that. But we're just going to talk about some of the basics, and I am going to go into some of like those disruptors today, and really hopefully just kind of give you a place to reconnect wherever you like are with your body. This is like just kind of a first thing that we can think about, tune into, and you don't, I guess what I'm going to say is you don't have to do anything to like try to fix it. This is really just like a place to witness, like, what is your body already doing, and can you like tune into what it's doing? So, getting into it, I have a lot here to talk about. So we're going to start with the female hormonal system, beginning to end. So we start puberty somewhere between 18 and 16, I would say. I'm going to say we experience puberty. I said 18 to 16. That's not what I meant. I meant 8 to 16. Now, of course, you can start puberty sooner, later, end it, but ultimately it's triggered by this hypothalamus pituitary ovaries axis, and estrogen and progesterone start to increase. Our physical changes, breast development, menstruation, hips widening, emotional sensitivity, right? And ultimately that like monthly cycle. So the ideal situation is that you're on a 28-day cycle. I guess I'll start there. Follicular phase, estrogen rises, growth, energy, optimism is really what's being experienced here. Then you have ovulation, estrogen peaks, libido, charisma, fertility. Then we enter into our luteal phase, progesterone rises, introspection, rest, PMS if you're dysregulated, and then menstruation, hormones drop, and you have a reset phase. The nervous system actually syncs to this rhythm every month, which I honestly didn't know. So I'm also learning new things. But the nervous system kind of anticipates us going through these phases and adjusts accordingly. So when you get into that like optimism, energy follicular phase, into like ovulation, it's more resilient to stress than I believe in the luteal phase. The other thing that I want to say about hormones here is, from my understanding of the female hormones, it's kind of like a roller coaster. That's the way that I always phrase it, right? We have these hormones and they like peak and valley, and one kind of takes the spotlight and then another one takes the spotlight and then another one takes the spotlight, right? So there's, again, just like this really like peak and valley level to this. Then we have perimenopause, somewhere between 35 to 50. Hormones fluctuate, often erratically. Estrogen might spike or crash. Progesterone typically declines first. You get things like hot flashes, irregular cycles, anxiety, fatigue. The nervous system is destabilized. It's harder to self-regulate. So one of the things that I think is interesting around this is the way that our nervous system actually corresponds to, I guess, like what happens during puberty. So when we go through puberty, let me rephrase this. When we start to go through puberty, our nervous system up until this point has really just kind of been like, okay, cool. I like eat, sleep, play. I don't die. I like stay safe. It's been like pretty survival based, really strictly survival based. But it also enters in this like new layer of complexity once we hit puberty. Right, so you start to have more emotional volatility or mood swings. Now, I will say I have a 4-year-old. She has mood swings already. But some of those like social anxiety, identity shifts, like awarenesses, like those all start to kind of come into play around the same time as puberty. So it actually like activates and matures the nervous system and really kind of creates like this first integration phase. And our hormones also, like, again, because our nervous system like syncs to the hormones, our hormones have like a big part to play in our nervous system. Okay, entering back, menopause. So after perimenopause, we experience menopause, which is roughly 12 months without a period. The average age for this is roughly 51. Estrogen and progesterone drop significantly. They basically like jump off a cliff and say, we're not playing any parts. Thanks for the last 30 years. We quit. Testosterone does remain, but at lower levels. Our body shifts to adrenal and brain-based hormone support rather than that like reproductive hormone support. So this is important to understand, because if you have been chronically burnt out or stressed for the last 30 years, then your adrenals aren't really functioning enough to be able to actually do what they may need to do to like pick up the slack for the like reproductive system not being active anymore. Mood swings, brain fog, weight changes, sleep disruptions, those are all common things to experience. And of course the nervous system feels this like hormonal void. Post-menopause, you don't have any sort of cyclical rhythm. Your baseline levels of hormones stay pretty low. You still do have hormones though, and I like want to make this clear. So your estrogen doesn't exactly disappear, but it is now produced in fat cells and adrenals instead of through the reproductive system, and testosterone becomes more influential. And I say that because we have testosterone throughout our normal cycle as well. And testosterone in again, my understanding, it doesn't really increase post-menopause. It's just that it becomes kind of like a bigger player because of the fact that our other two, estrogen and progesterone, have kind of dipped off. One of the things that I want to say about this is it's important to understand like that the nervous system is affected by all of this, because it also means that as we enter that like perimenopause, menopausal time frame, right, the things that maybe you like at one point had patience for might now be tested in a different way. So then we have the male hormonal puberty, typically 10 through 16, testosterone surges, body, facial hair, voice change, growth, sex drive. Their brain changes to an increased risk-reward behavior, social identity shifts. The nervous system really gets wired for competitiveness, arousal, response to external validation. And I think that's like just an important thing to know is the nervous system in puberty in both sexes begins to get wired for something different than what it was before, right? So in the female puberty, it begins to get wired to that hormonal shift and cycle, that 28-day cycle, whereas for the male experiencing puberty, it begins to get wired for competitiveness. Adulthood, testosterone peaks and stays relatively stable. Nervous system hormones operate really in a daily rhythm. The way that I think about testosterone and the male cycle is really like you wake up with 100% testosterone, it depletes throughout the day, and then you go to bed and wake up with 100% testosterone. Now, that being said, as you age, once you get into your 30s, testosterone does start to decline at about 1% a year. So energy, libido, mood, all may shift slowly. And unlike women who experience like a very quick menopause, well, I mean, not that it's quick. I mean, perimenopause in itself can last like 15 years. But menopause, you know, it's I'm going to say like perimenopause, because the female cycle does more of like a roller coaster-y thing, it's a pretty like quick drop off, whereas men don't have like a quick drop off. It's just this slow, steady decline. So potentially experiencing low testosterone, especially as like they age, because the more they age, the more testosterone declines. Symptoms might be things like fatigue, muscle loss, ED, irritability. Again, the nervous system like does also come into play here too. So as testosterone drops off, again, the nervous system is kind of asked to like pick that slack up. So again, you might experience more less patience, I guess is what I want to say. Maybe more stress, things that maybe didn't get to you before and now are getting to you. So hormones do help regulate the nervous system. They do help regulate that fight, flight, freeze, stress response. Puberty really begins to like add fuel to the system, so our resilience increases, and menopause, perimenopause can like drain that nervous system. In men, because they have slower hormonal changes, there's less disruption, but chronic stress still wears the system. And again, like because there is that kind of like chronic, like, yeah, I guess I'll say chronic decrease in testosterone, that also can wear the system. Checking in to see if there was anything else I wanted to say about that, but I don't think so. So some different hormonal disruptors. I didn't think that I would do this episode justice if I didn't at least talk about some of them, because there are so many, and I think it's important to understand that, you know, maybe you don't have any disruptors in your life, and that's great. But for many of us, we do, and maybe you're willing to adjust your life or get rid of some of them. Maybe you're not. It just becomes a connection point to understand how difficult it is to maybe tune back in to that hormonal cycle that you naturally experience. And I will follow that up by going into this first disruptor, synthetic interventions, specifically talking about hormonal birth control, such as the pill, the patch, the ring, the implant, or shot. They override your natural cycle with steady or shifting synthetic hormones. So rather than your cycle is kind of maybe like on the back burner, or I don't know if I want to say back burner, but kind of in the background doing its normal thing. And because hormonal birth control is effective, right, put it into our body, and that like overrides what's already happening. So suppresses ovulation. You may experience some sort of cycle or period, but it's not really a true period. It does blunt cycle sensitivity and resilience building. It does disrupt the brain-ovary communication. Now, I'm not saying any of that to say you shouldn't be on hormonal birth control. I'm just saying if you choose to be on hormonal birth control, understand that your connection into your cycle might be harder to like know what's going on underneath the scenes, because that synthetic hormone is kind of like, I think of it kind of like a layer. And so I don't know why this is the analogy that like came into my mind, but sometimes when my daughter is upset, she likes to go into her room and hide under the blankets and then yell for me. And of course, her being under the blankets and yelling for me, like it muffles that yell, right? So I just can't hear her as well, but I can potentially still hear her. And I think of like synthetic hormones as kind of doing the same thing, right? It like is that blanket over that kind of muffles whatever sound is happening underneath. IUDs, there are hormonal and non-hormonal. So hormonal IUDs have local progesterone in it. Lighter, no periods, again, it's going to do the same thing. Even though it is like localized, it's probably going to do the same thing where it like masks that cycle that's happening underneath. In fact, I have a hormonal IUD, and I'm getting to the tail end of it now. So for the past 5 years or so, I've really had like no symptoms at all. It's been in some ways, I want to say very dysregulating because of the fact that I don't have a natural cycle, but I know my body's still doing something. And at the same time, it's just become like my new norm. But as I've gotten to the end, I've started to hear my body again. And so just know, even with a hormonal IUD, it is possible to still hear things, but it does definitely create that mask. And then, of course, there's a non-hormonal copper IUD. There's no hormonal suppression, but it might still alter bleeding patterns. Physical interventions, right? So if you have a hysterectomy, depending on whether or not the ovaries are kept, the ovaries can still cycle. If they're removed, then go into basically immediate menopause. Tubal ligation, there's actually no hormonal change that happens. It's just a physical block. And vasectomy, same kind of thing. There's no hormonal change. In environmental and lifestyle disruptors, so of course, stress is going to affect, I think, most people who are under the like typical female hormonal know that stress is a factor. So burnout, trauma, overwork. Interestingly enough, under eating or over exercising can also lead to different hormonal disruptions. Endocrine disrupting chemicals, so certain shampoos, plastics, perfumes, sleep deprivation, nutrient deficiencies, especially like fat-soluble vitamins, zinc, B vitamins. Now, I'm not saying that you have to get rid of all environmental and lifestyle disruptors. I'm just saying that be aware these things do disrupt your hormonal system. So if you aren't sure what's happening with your hormones, this may also be a factor. Okay. Female hormone reproductive conditions. I'm only going to touch on a couple of these because there are a lot of them. So just know if you have some sort of irregular cycle, if you have some sort of reproductive condition, it might be harder for you to understand like what your body is doing or when it's in which part of the cycle, all of those types of things. PCOS, I feel like it's pretty common these days. Irregular or no ovulation, insulin resistance, endometriosis, the endometrial like tissue starts to grow outside of the uterus, pain, inflammation, infertility, PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, severe emotional and physical symptoms pre-period, linked to progesterone sensitivity or serotonin disruption. Okay, there are many more, including like thyroid conditions, ovarian conditions, but if you experience like some sort of irregular menstruation and aren't on some sort of like hormonal birth control, I do recommend you talk to like a hormonal specialist. Honestly, I think that as women, our hormones should be not just like talked about, but tested more regularly than they are. It should be much easier to have. Common male hormonal issues, low testosterone, can be caused by aging, trauma, chronic stress, obesity. Some symptoms include low libido, depression, fatigue, erectile dysfunction, pituitary disorders, tumors, or damage that can affect hormone production. There's far less on the like male hormonal issues side. So some supportive tools for all gender. One of them is stress management. Now I will say I just did like two episodes ago, I think, nervous system tools. So if you're like, hey, I think that stress is affecting both my nervous system and my hormones, like let me go do some of that, then please go visit that. I'm not going to rehash all of them here. Nourishing foods, adequate rest, working with professionals, of course, and then awareness of your own patterns, symptoms, changes, all of those types of things. Again, I feel like it's important to talk about hormones, not because I think that they're super interesting, but because it's something that runs really in the background of our body. And I think that if you're somebody who like has a cycle and has a menstruation, that it can be more in your face than, let's say, like the average male who doesn't experience that and has a pretty common steady relationship with testosterone, which is really like their hormone. But also, I think that one of the things that isn't really talked about very much is that people who go through cycles, we are not made to really function the same way that like the male hormonal steady testosterone is. And I think that this is important to talk about because we can talk about, in one of my first, 2 or 3 podcast episodes, I brushed on the subject of like human design and the different types of people there are, right? And we're all made differently, and what works for one body and what works for another body is not going to be the same. right? So what is going to work for somebody who is primarily testosterone based hormonally might not work for somebody who goes through a 28-day cycle. And similarly, right, like my husband is, like in human design, both myself and my husband are generators. Like my husband will get up and do the same thing whether he likes it or not, and I like just can't. I can't. I have a very different relationship, and of course I do think a portion of that is because I do also like listen to my body, and I listen to my hormones, and I hear those things, and I can tell when my nervous system is doing things, where he just, is kind of like, nope, we're just gonna like put that all on mute. I'm just gonna do the thing that I'm gonna do, and like this is what has to be done. And I think that there's a world where both of that, unfortunately right now, right, like both of those things are needed. And I wish that my husband could just like do what he wanted to do all the time, but we're not in a place where that's possible yet. So I just say that to say, right, like these hormones do also affect our daily output and what we're able to do and how we're able to push through. So give yourself some grace there. So this is just like a little bonus fun theory that nobody asked for, but I have to say it. So, let me see if I want to discuss. I'm reviewing my notes real quick to see if I post-menopause. I think I talked about that. Yeah, so I talked about basically everything hormonally that I wanted to talk about. But in doing some of this research and in having my brain work and operate the way that it does, I had this like kind of funny moment where I realized that unfortunately when we get to like around that age of 50 or so, things start to really like work against us. And I have started to learn more about astrology, and not that this is going to be a whole astrological lesson for you guys, but there is this, I believe it's technically classified as an asteroid, but an asteroid Chiron that shows up in everybody's astrology chart. And you might be like, cool, Paige, what does this have to do with anything that we were just talking about today? And I will get there. So we experience kind of like these returns in astrology, right? Where the planet, asteroid, etc. comes back to the place that it was in your chart when you were born. And Chiron is one of those. Well, I mean, really all planets do that. But Chiron is one of those markers, and it doesn't really get talked about, but it typically happens around age 50. And Chiron is seen as our like wounded healer. So when I was like looking through and like researching some of this information, it was like, oh, okay, so like around 50, our hormones basically are like, cool, it's been real, but like I'm out of here. Thanks, but no thanks, I quit. And our nervous system has to respond and be like, whoa, hold on, can't take on as much. We gotta like whole recalibrate. And all the same while Chiron comes up and is like, hey, by the way, all of these things we need to like look into and unpack. And it kind of like shines a flashlight, so to speak, on some of our wounding and whether or not we've worked through that or not. And it gives me a different look at what we have as society kind of classified as like a midlife crisis, right? Because to me, especially now knowing what I know and doing some of the things that I do, right, it's like, oh, like our midlife crisis is really less about whatever we think it is. And in my theory here, it is like our midlife crisis is a mixture of our hormones coming off, like our hormones quitting, our nervous system recalibrating, and Chiron being like, hey, by the way, have you worked through any of this stuff? And I think, especially for me, because I've been searching for some answers, I have I've seen a few people who have been married for 20 or 30 some odd years, who've gotten divorced recently, and kind of wondering, in a way, like, what is that all about, and what's like really happening underneath the surface. And I think that like this might all play into part of that, right? That we go through these big shifts and we kind of have the cards stacked against us, and maybe the things that we used to be able to tolerate we're not able to tolerate, or we're not willing to, or the communication gets a little fried in between. And I think that there are times where we just, kind of implode on ourselves. It's really not funny, but that's how I deal with my own stuff. And I think that this is true too, even though like women primarily go through perimenopause and menopause, right? I think that this is also true for men, because even though they have a slow decline, right? If we say that, age 35, they start to lose that like 1% a year. By the time they've hit 50, they're down 15%, so now their cap, instead of being at 100, like their highest is 85, and they're like, nope, like this is our new normal, we only get here. And it kind of like, again, I don't know if I like officially used this example earlier, but I do think of it as kind of like a battery, and it's like your phone battery. You charge it overnight, you wake up with 100%, and that's cool. And while you have like a new phone, right, oftentimes that battery works and it can maybe go for long periods of time. And as that battery starts to drain, while for us, right, like our phone battery might still hit 100, it's much quicker to drain, right? We're like, I see the male cycle now being like, nope, we don't ever get to 100, like we just get to 85, and like this is what you have to work with. And especially understanding that the hormones do help regulate the nervous system and vice versa, right? As that decreases, then our nervous system also says, hey, I can only hold so much. And I think it just causes a lot of mayhem that up until this point we've normalized in ways of talking about things like a midlife crisis, right? But we also don't really look at the things behind the scenes that are happening. So yeah, I think with that, I feel complete about today. I know it's probably like not the most fun in terms of, because I do want to keep, the focus on like how do we reconnect. Really, can you pinpoint the times that you feel down, right? And I'm going to say down because sometimes, whether you're a male and regardless of your age, right, like maybe you wake up and you're like, yeah, cool, like I feel good, but then as the day goes on, you're like, wow, yeah, like I really start to dip around 3 or 4 o'clock, or I really start to dip around 7 o'clock. And maybe for a female, right, that's like, yeah, like I have down days like every 2-3 days because of the way that my cycle is, right? If you do have a female hormonal cycle, right, like what are the times that you feel like really outgoing and really good and really social? Because that's also part of your hormones. Like that's not just like, wow, I feel really good today. That's like, wow, my hormones are like, yep, this one's on the rise. And what are the times that you like feel more defensive? And so really just kind of like looking into all of that and, feeling in now if you are perimenopausal and your cycle's all over the place, right? Again, like how well can you see, like, maybe it's not like a typical tracking in the same way that it used to be, right? But like, can you feel what's happening in your body? Can you feel any of those types of things? And then even if you're like menopausal or postmenopausal, right? Like how can you tell? I would almost go more off of like a nervous system calibration, and say like, okay, can you tell how like your nervous system feels? Can you tell like how good you feel when you've actually slept 8 hours and not just 4? Can you tell like how your body feels when you've eaten different foods? Because those hormones, again, right, like estrogen, even though it's still there, it's less. Can you tell like, you know, whatever. Like I said, I would go more off of a nervous system base, but in theory, you know, they do, testosterone is, again, becomes like more prevalent here, not because it necessarily increases, but just because it's like kind of more of a primary player now. So like, can you tell that you've started to get into competitive streaks, you know, any of those things. So with that, I am done for today, and next episode we'll talk about some other part of the body. Sending you so much love. Thanks for joining me today on Reconnecting with Wholeness. I invite you to take what resonated and explore how it shows up in your own life. Keep in mind, even the smallest shifts can spark transformation. If today's episode felt valuable for you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share it, leave a review, or connect with me on social media. Until next time, keep exploring, keep feeling, and keep reconnecting with the wholeness that's already within you. Take care, and I'll see you in the next episode.